You ever feel like you're not alone, even when the house is dead silent? Like there's someone, something, watching you from the shadows, lurking just beyond the edges of your vision. That's how it began for me. And once it started, it never stopped. It was the fall of 1945, just after the war had ended. My husband had gone off to fight, and though I prayed every night for him to return, I knew deep down he never would. The house felt emptier every day, this enormous, old mansion where every creak and groan echoed through its halls like the whispers of ghosts. I lived there with my 2 children, and Nicholas. They were my whole world. But there was something wrong with them, something I couldn't explain. The doctors said it was a rare condition, something to do with light sensitivity. They couldn't be exposed to daylight at all, not even for a second. So I kept the curtains drawn tight, every window shrouded in heavy drapes. We lived in perpetual twilight. I had rules. The children weren't allowed outside. The doors had to be locked, the curtains had to be closed. Always. And we couldn't open one door without closing another first. It was for their safety, I kept telling myself. It was all to protect them. But after a while, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a cage. A cold, dark cage. I tried to keep busy, to make things feel normal. But then the servants left, just up and vanished without a word. So I had to hire new help, strangers. I didn't trust them, not at first. But what choice did I have? They were quiet, and they seemed kind enough. Mrs. Mills, the old housekeeper, Mr. Tuttle, the gardener, and Lydia, the mute girl who hardly said a word. But there was something about them that felt off. It started with small things. Objects moving, doors that were closed suddenly standing open. At first, I thought it was the children, playing games. But then, my daughter began talking about others. People in the house who weren't supposed to be there.
"There's a boy named Victor,"
she'd say.
"He and his family live here too."
I scolded her, thinking it was just her imagination. After all, we hadn't had visitors in years, not since the war began. But she insisted. She said she'd seen them. Victor, his mother, his father. And that they weren't like us. They were strangers, intruders. I grew angry. This was our home, and I wouldn't tolerate such nonsense. But the more I ignored it, the more things started happening. I began hearing footsteps in the hallways, heavy and deliberate, like boots walking across the floor. But when I went to check, there was no one there. Doors slammed shut on their own, and then there were voices, faint, echoing through the walls, like distant conversations happening just beyond my reach. The children were terrified. And so was I. One night, I heard her speaking to someone in her room. When I burst in, she was sitting in the corner, facing a blank space as if she were talking to thin air. I demanded to know who she was speaking to, and she just looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified.
"Victor says you don't believe me. He says you'll see them soon."
That's when the nightmares began. I dreamt of a fog rolling through the house, cold and suffocating. In the dreams, I was always running, chasing shadows that danced just beyond my reach. I'd wake up gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. The strange happenings only grew worse. The piano would play itself in the middle of the night. Faint whispers and laughter filled the air, as if a crowd of invisible people were watching, waiting. The children wouldn't sleep in their own rooms anymore. They said they were afraid of the others, and they weren't alone in their fear. I started locking the doors at night, bolting them shut, but the voices always seemed to find their way inside. One day, I confronted Mrs. Mills. I demanded to know if she had seen anything strange, if the servants were responsible for the disturbances. But she just looked at me with that unsettling calm she always had.
"This house has a history,"
she said quietly.
"It's seen many things, many people come and go. Perhaps the house hasn't forgotten."
I didn't understand what she meant, but something in her voice made my skin crawl. It was like she knew something I didn't, like she was keeping a secret from me. Then, the photos appeared. Old, black and white photographs of people I didn't recognize, people lying in bed, their eyes closed, their bodies stiff. The children found them hidden in the attic, tucked away in an old chest. Mrs. Mills explained they were death portraits, a tradition from the old days. Families would take pictures of their loved ones after they'd passed, to remember them. But these photos, they felt too real. Too close. It wasn't long after that when I heard the truth. One night, the voices grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed my rifle, convinced that intruders had finally broken into my home. I stormed through the house, kicking open doors, searching for the others. But when I reached the drawing room, I froze. There they were. A family I'd never seen before. A man, a woman, and a young boy. And they were sitting in my house, looking at me as if I were the intruder. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "This is my home!" The woman stood up slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear.
"We're the ones who should be asking you that,"
she said, her voice trembling.
You're dead."
The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, my mind reeling. But the moment she said it, everything clicked into place, the missing servants, the photographs, the whispers in the dark. I was the ghost. We were the intruders. I turned to run, desperate to find my children, to protect them from the truth. But deep down, I knew they already understood. They had known all along, even before I did. We were the ones haunting this house, clinging to a past that was long gone. The house had kept us trapped here, locked in a limbo between life and death. And now, we had to let go. I found Anne and Nicholas huddled together in their room, wide-eyed and silent. I sat down beside them, feeling the weight of everything crash over me. I told them the truth, what we had been, what we had become. And they just nodded, as if they had always known. "We don't have to be afraid anymore," I whispered. "We're together. That's all that matters." As I held my children close, I felt the house grow still, the air heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I wasn't afraid. This was no longer our home. But in a way, it always would be. The others, the real family, left soon after. They couldn't stay, not with us there. We didn't belong to the world of the living anymore. But we belonged here, in the shadows of the past, in the echoes of memories that would never fade. The house may be empty now, but it's never truly silent. Because we're still here, waiting, watching. And sometimes, the dead don't need to haunt you. Sometimes, you're the one haunting them.